Welcome to In History. Gangs are often thought of as a modern phenomenon, but the truth is, organized criminal groups have existed for thousands of years. From the bustling streets of ancient Rome to the shadowy underworlds of medieval India, these gangs have left a lasting mark on history. Today, we're diving deep into the world of ancient gangs, exploring their origins, their operations, and their impact on the societies they terrorized. In ancient Rome, the bustling city streets were controlled not just by the legions of the empire, but also by organized gangs known as collegia. Originally, collegia were guilds or associations for various trades. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of labor unions. But some of these collegia evolved into something much more sinister. These groups began to engage in criminal activities such as extortion, protection rackets, and even political violence. They were often hired by powerful political figures to intimidate rivals, disrupt elections, or enforce the will of the elite. In a city where power was everything, the collegia were a tool for those who sought to control the masses. The collegia were notorious for their role in Roman elections, which were often violent and chaotic. Politicians would hire these gangs to rally support or suppress it through force. The streets of Rome could become a battlefield as these gangs fought for control, making the collegia a feared and powerful force in the ancient city. In ancient Greece, particularly in Athens, similar gangs known as phalange operated within the city-states. These groups were often composed of young men who banded together for protection, but they quickly became involved in street violence and political intimidation. The phalange engaged in brawls, theft, and extortion. They were sometimes employed by politicians to disrupt the assemblies, the heart of Athenian democracy, to sway political decisions in their favor. Just like the collegia in Rome, these gangs were tools of the powerful, used to maintain control over the lower classes and secure political power. Their influence extended even to public festivals and religious ceremonies, which could be manipulated by these gangs to reflect the interests of those who paid them. The phalange became a shadowy force in ancient Greek society, highlighting the darker side of the democratic process. Moving to the ancient Near East, we find the Zealots in Judea, one of the most famous examples of a politically motivated gang in ancient history. The Zealots were a Jewish political movement that fiercely opposed Roman rule. Among them, the Sicarii, a splinter group, became notorious for their extreme tactics. The Sicarii, named after the small daggers they concealed beneath their cloaks, specialized in assassinations. They targeted Roman officials and Jewish collaborators, striking in crowded places before melting back into the populace. Their goal was to incite rebellion and create chaos that would drive the Romans out of Judea. The Zealots and Sicarii played a significant role in the First Jewish-Roman War, which ultimately led to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Their actions had a lasting impact on Jewish history and the Roman Empire, showing how even a small, determined group could challenge a vast empire. Fast forward to the medieval period in the Middle East, where we find one of the most feared and enigmatic gangs in history, the Hashashin, or Assassins. Operating from their mountain strongholds, the Assassins were a secretive Islamic sect that used terror and assassination as their primary tools. The Hashashin were masters of stealth and surprise. They would infiltrate their targets' strongholds, often posing as servants or guards, and strike without warning. Their targets were usually political or religious leaders who opposed their beliefs. The fear of the Assassins was so great that their reputation alone was enough to cow many into submission. Their influence spread across the Middle East, but their reign of terror eventually came to an end when the Mongols destroyed their strongholds in the 13th century. However, the legacy of the Assassins lives on, immortalized in legends and modern popular culture. Halfway around the world, in India, another infamous gang operated in the shadows, the Thuggis. Unlike the politically motivated Zealots or Assassins, the Thuggis were a criminal cult dedicated to the goddess Kali. Their methods were as brutal as they were secretive. The Thuggees were known for strangling their victims with a cloth noose, a method that left little evidence behind. They would pose as fellow travelers, gain their victims' trust, and then strike when the moment was right. After the killing, they would rob the bodies and dispose of them in ways that made discovery unlikely. The Thuggees terrorized the Indian countryside for centuries, until British colonial authorities launched a campaign to eradicate them in the 19th century. The campaign was successful, but the Thuggees' brutal legacy left an indelible mark on Indian history. The Mediterranean Sea, a hub of ancient trade, was also home to notorious pirate gangs who preyed on merchant ships and coastal towns. These pirates were more than just thieves. They were organized, ruthless, and a constant threat to ancient maritime trade. Pirate gangs in the Mediterranean were known for their brutality. They didn't just steal goods, they took captives to sell as slaves and demanded ransoms for wealthy prisoners. These gangs operated with impunity for centuries, terrorizing the seas and making the Mediterranean one of the most dangerous waters in the ancient world. Rome eventually had enough. In 67 BCE, Pompey the Great was given extraordinary powers to clear the Mediterranean of pirates. In a remarkable campaign, Pompey's forces crushed the pirate gangs, restoring order to the seas and securing Rome's control over Mediterranean trade. Even in the vast lands of ancient China, bandit gangs roamed the countryside, preying on travelers and isolated villages. These gangs were often composed of former soldiers, outlaws, and those driven to crime by poverty or political instability. Banditry was a persistent problem in ancient China, particularly during times of weak central authority. These gangs would ambush travelers, steal goods, and sometimes even kidnap people for ransom. They operated with impunity in remote areas where government forces were scarce. In response, local militias were often formed to protect communities from bandit attacks. The government also launched campaigns to suppress banditry, but the rugged terrain and widespread poverty made it a difficult problem to eradicate completely. From the streets of Rome to the mountains of China, gangs have been a part of human history for millennia. These ancient gangs were more than just criminals. They were products of their time, shaped by the social, political, and economic conditions of their societies. While the weapons and methods may have changed, the underlying forces that give rise to gangs remain strikingly similar. Poverty, power struggles, and the quest for control continue to fuel organized crime today, just as they did in ancient times. The stories of these ancient gangs remind us that history is not just a record of kings and battles, but also of the struggles of ordinary people, struggles that, for better or worse, continue to shape our world today. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more fascinating tales on In History.